Out of Gas Horror Stories, the first story, The Haunting Whispers of the Empty Road. I stepped out of the car, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the desolate stretch of road ahead. The sun had set, casting eerie shadows over the barren landscape. My fuel gauge had been flirting with empty for miles, but I never imagined it would run dry in the middle of nowhere. I shivered in the chilly night air, my breath visible in the dim light of the crescent moon. The engine had sputtered its last, leaving me alone in this forsaken place. I knew I had to find help, but the nearest town was at least 20 miles away. The oppressive silence pressed down on me, broken only by the occasional rustling of unseen creatures in the bushes. With a sinking feeling, I realized my cell phone had no signal. Panic started to creep in as I contemplated the isolation and darkness that surrounded me. I decided to gather my courage and began walking in the direction of the town, clutching my jacket tightly around me. As I stumbled through the darkness, I couldn't help but feel watched. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of something darting just beyond the edge of my vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I chalked it up to my frazzled nerves and pressed on. After what felt like hours, I finally spotted a distant light. My heart soared as I quickened my pace, hoping it was a house or a gas station. But as I got closer, I realized it was a dilapidated, abandoned cabin. My desperation gave way to unease as I approached cautiously. The door of the cabin creaked open, revealing a pitch-black interior. I hesitated, my gut telling me to stay away, but my aching feet and fear of the unknown won out. I cautiously stepped inside, using my phone's weak flashlight to guide me. The air was damp and musty, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. The cabin seemed deserted, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I moved deeper into the cabin, I stumbled upon a dusty, old journal. I picked it up and began to read, hoping to find some answers. The entries in the journal were chilling. They spoke of a previous traveler who had run out of gas on this very road. He had taken refuge in this cabin, only to vanish without a trace. The last entry read, "They are watching me. Whispers in the night. I can't escape." A shiver ran down my spine, and I quickly put the journal down, realizing the dire situation I was in. I needed to leave this place, but as I turned to head for the door, I heard faint whispers echoing through the cabin. It was as if the very walls themselves were talking. Panic seized me, and I fled the cabin, sprinting back out into the darkness. The road seemed to stretch on forever, and I had no idea how far I had run. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more insistent. I couldn't make out the words, but their tone was full of malevolence. My legs burned, and I stumbled, falling to the ground. The whispers closed in, and I realized I was surrounded by an unseen presence. It felt like a suffocating darkness, like 100 eyes watching me from all directions. I screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the cacophony of whispers, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the whispers stopped. The darkness receded, and I was left trembling on the ground, alone. The road ahead was empty, and I realized the town was still nowhere in sight. With a heavy heart and the memory of those malevolent whispers, I got to my feet and continued walking, knowing that something sinister lurked in the darkness. The dread of that night still haunts me, and I can't help but wonder if the whispers are still out there, waiting for their next victim on that desolate stretch of road. The second story, Whispers in the Dark Forest, a Gasping Escape. The gas gauge had been teetering on empty for miles, and I knew I was pushing my luck. But I had no choice. The winding road through the dense forest was a shortcut I had taken before, and it had always saved me precious time. That is, until now. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows between the towering trees. My heart raced as the engine sputtered and then died. The car coasted to a stop on the narrow, winding road, and I cursed under my breath. I reached for my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Just like the last time I had taken this forsaken route. With a sigh, I decided to venture out of the car and see if I could spot any signs of civilization through the thick woods. The oppressive silence of the forest weighed on me as I ventured deeper into the trees. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. As darkness settled in, my anxiety grew. I knew I had to find help soon, but the remote location made that a daunting task. The woods seemed to close in around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig sent a shiver down my spine. Just when I was beginning to panic, I spotted a faint light in the distance. It was a small, dim glow, but it gave me hope. I made my way towards it, pushing through the underbrush, and after what felt like an eternity, I emerged into a clearing in the center of the clearing was an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, but the light was coming from inside. My desperation outweighed my fear, and I cautiously approached the cabin. The door was partially ajar, and I pushed it open. The interior was a dimly lit, cluttered mess of old furniture and cobwebs. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" But there was no response. I hesitated but decided to step further inside. As I moved deeper into the cabin, I noticed something odd. The walls were covered in strange symbols and drawings. They seemed ancient and otherworldly, like nothing I had ever seen before. My curiosity got the better of me, and I took out my phone to snap some pictures of the bizarre markings. As I did, I heard a soft, eerie whispering in the background. I couldn't make out the words, but the voices were unsettling, as if they were speaking in a language from a different realm. I continued to explore the cabin, my unease growing with every step. In one room, I found a journal, its pages yellowed with age. As I began to read, I discovered that it belonged to a previous traveler who had run out of gas on this very road. He, too, had sought refuge in this cabin. The journal told a chilling tale. The traveler had been tormented by the same whispers that I now heard. They had whispered secrets, promises, and threats, driving him to the brink of madness. The final entry read, "I can't take it anymore. I've made a pact. I hope it's worth it." A cold dread settled in my chest. I knew I had to leave the cabin, but as I turned to go, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. They surrounded me, echoing from all directions. The symbols on the walls seemed to come to life, their eerie glow intensifying. I fled the cabin, sprinting back into the woods, but the whispers followed, their voices rising to a crescendo. I stumbled and fell, and as I lay on the forest floor, gasping for breath, the voices reached a fevered pitch. It was as if the very forest itself was alive with a malevolent presence. Terrified, I screamed, and the whispers enveloped me, drowning out my cries. I could feel something closing in, something ancient and powerful, something that had been waiting for me. I could see no escape, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, the whispers stopped. The symbols on the trees and the cabin dimmed, and I was left in the darkness, gasping for air. The forest was silent, and I was alone. I struggled to my feet, disoriented and shaken to my core. The gas gauge had been a cruel prank, leading me into this nightmare. I knew I had to get out of the woods, and I stumbled through the dark, praying that I would find my way back to civilization. As I finally reached the road and saw the distant lights of a town, I couldn't help but wonder about the whispers and the ancient secrets that lay hidden in that forest. I knew I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than running out of gas, and the memory of that night would haunt me forever. The last story, Whispers of the Desert Abyss. The desolate desert road stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the horizon under the blazing sun. My fuel gauge had been hovering dangerously close to empty for the last few miles, but I was determined to make it to the next town. That determination began to wane as the engine sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in the unforgiving heat. I cursed my bad luck and wiped the sweat from my brow. With a sigh, I reached for my phone to call for help, but the signal bar stubbornly displayed no service. I was in the middle of nowhere, alone and without a lifeline. I stepped out of the car and felt the scorching sand burn through the soles of my shoes. The heat was oppressive, and the silence of the desert was deafening. I knew the nearest town was at least 30 miles away, and I had no choice but to start walking. As I trudged through the unforgiving landscape, my mouth grew parched, and the sun beat down on me mercilessly. The sand seemed to stretch on forever, and each step I took felt like a Herculean effort. My surroundings offered no respite, it was a desolation that seemed to go on. The hours passed, and my desperation grew. I couldn't help but feel as though I was being watched. The endless dunes seemed to have eyes, and I imagined shadowy figures moving just beyond the periphery of my vision. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a bone-chilling fear began to take hold. The desert night was just as harsh as the day, and I had no shelter or protection from its icy grip. The stars above me seemed distant and uncaring, and I knew I had to find help soon. Just when I was on the verge of despair, I spotted a faint light in the distance. My heart leaped with hope, and I quickened my pace toward it. As I approached, I saw that it was a small, weathered gas station in the middle of nowhere. Relief washed over me as I entered the dimly lit building. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of gasoline and dust. Shelves of long-forgotten snacks and drinks lined the walls, covered in a layer of grime. The place seemed deserted, and I called out, "Is anyone here? I've run out of gas." There was no response, but I noticed a small bell hanging above the counter. I gave it a hesitant ring, and the sound echoed through the empty station. That's when I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. It was as if the very walls were murmuring secrets to each other. I strained my ears to listen, but the words were indistinct, like a distant conversation. The whispers seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, like they held some ancient, hidden knowledge. Curiosity got the better of me, and I began to explore the gas station. The flickering fluorescent lights cast eerie shadows on the grimy windows, and the whispers grew louder as I moved through the building. In a back room, I discovered an old, dusty ledger. Its pages were filled with names and dates, along with cryptic symbols that made no sense to me. The last entry was from a traveler who had found himself in a similar predicament. It read, "The whispers won't stop. They promised me a way out." A chill ran down my spine as I read the entry. The whispers now seemed to be directed at me, their words more sinister and alluring. They spoke of secrets, of forbidden knowledge, and of a way out of the desert. My curiosity gave way to unease, but a part of me wanted to know more. I continued to follow the whispers, and they led me to a trapdoor in the floor. I hesitated, knowing that this could be a terrible mistake, but the pull of the whispers was too strong. With trembling hands, I lifted the door and descended into the darkness below. The underground chamber was a maze of tunnels, their walls adorned with strange, ancient symbols that seemed to come to life in the dim light of my phone's flashlight. The whispers were now a cacophony, their voices echoing off the walls, and I couldn't make out the words, but their intent was clear. They wanted something from me. As I delved deeper into the labyrinth, I stumbled upon a room filled with ancient manuscripts and tomes. They contained knowledge that should have remained hidden, forbidden truths that threatened to unravel the fabric of reality. The whispers became frenzied, urging me to read, to learn, to embrace the forbidden knowledge. But as I reached for one of the books, I felt a sudden, searing pain in my head. It was as though my very thoughts were being ripped apart. I recoiled in agony, clutching my head, and the whispers grew louder and more insistent. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape the clutches of the sinister whispers, but the tunnels seemed to shift and change, leading me in circles. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped in this subterranean nightmare. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time seemed to lose all meaning as I wandered through the tunnels, tormented by the relentless whispers. I had lost all hope of ever escaping the underground labyrinth when, suddenly, the whispers stopped. I found myself in the chamber with the trapdoor, and with trembling hands, I climbed back into the gas station. The whispers had ceased, and the place was eerily silent. The gas station appeared just as abandoned as before. I stumbled back out into the desert, the gas station disappearing behind me. As I walked, I couldn't help but wonder about the enigmatic whispers and the forbidden knowledge they offered. I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than running out of gas, but the memory of that night would haunt me forever, a dark secret I would carry to my grave.